Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be discussing the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is the Clemenson Blair edition, edited and translated by Thomas Dalton. This is the first part in a multi-part series in which I'm going to be talking about this. Today I'm going to just try to give an introduction to the text and talk about some issues. In the next part, I'll actually read from the protocols themselves. And in the third part, I'm going to give some Catholic commentary on the protocols. The first thing you have to realize is if you've done any sort of preliminary searching on this topic, on this text, you're going to find page after page after page on Google about how this is a forgery. And somehow this means that you shouldn't bother looking at it. And for me and for many people, it doesn't really matter whether it's a forgery or not. There was a law case in Switzerland and one of many cases in which some legal outcome happens and therefore everything else has to be discarded. We can see this, for example, with David Irving, with the Dreyfus case, that if you win some legal judgment, it means that everything is focused on that legal judgment. And so you'll see this entire focus on a forgery. But the question isn't someone trying to pass this off as written by Jews. Whether it is irrelevant. The question is, what does the text say? Does the text point out things that are happening in our world decades later? So given that this text was written in the late 1800s, let's say at the very earliest in the early 1900s, why is it describing life as it was in the 1940s, 50s, and even in our present day? The question has to be, whoever the author is, forger or not, he has access or she has access to knowledge about people who are helping to make these events happen. Whether they are the Elders of Zion or not is irrelevant. You can just call it the protocols, not refer to anybody. And if it is supposed to be anti-Semitic, it doesn't do a very good job of being really hateful about Jews. The text is not really oriented in that way. In fact, it's much more political. And if you read it, which I've taken the time to read, it's not very long, it jumps all over the place. It's hardly a straightforward, coherent attack. It's simply some notes here and there. It sounds, if you look at it, it looks like someone's taking notes or, in a sense, listening to a lecture and cribbing some ideas. But that's ultimately at the heart of studying the protocols, is a question of what do they mean? Who wrote them is less relevant than what it says. And organized jury have done a very good job of shutting down any discussion on this topic by just saying, well, it's a forgery. Okay, and now what? To make it much more simple and banal, if someone tells you about this great restaurant and someone says, oh, well, but they stole all the recipes from this restaurant. Okay, which restaurant? Oh, well, it doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't matter. But apparently the food's pretty good. So as they say, it's a much more banal example, but the idea is less about, well, where did they get the recipes and is the food any good? So same thing here. Why is it that people are still talking about this 100 years later if it's a forgery and it's a complete piece of trash and you have to spend all of this time and money writing articles explaining to people how it's trash? Just let them read it and find out if it is trash. The problem is all of that suppression hasn't worked. People are reading it, and the protocols do have some interesting things to say. So here I'm going to, as I said, in this part today, I'm just going to be mostly reading from introductory essays talking about some of the content of the protocols. And in the next part of this series, I will read from the protocols themselves. Only in the Jewish worldview can success be a bad thing, or rather, publicity about success, which is the real issue here. That the Jews, especially in the West, have prospered beyond all reasonable expectation is clear to anyone who has given even brief thought to the Jewish question. But they have done so despite centuries, even millennia, of condemnation, attack, abuse, and yes, hatred. A core element of the global Jewish strategy for interacting with the Gentiles, the non-Jews, is to play up the historically valid victimhood status, while at the same time hiding away the fact that they have simultaneously managed to acquire absurd amounts of wealth and power. Jews have been overly influential for literally 2,000 years, and they have been detested, hated, and abused for just as long. They love playing the victim, but hate being exposed as the victor, the king, the tyrant. Then around the turn of the 20th century comes along this little document, an extended essay really, too short to be called a book, known today as the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which seems to lay out, in clear and explicit terms, the nature of recent and phenomenal Jewish success, along with the plan to acquire more in the near future. The means for this success, however, is troubling. A suppression, manipulation, exploitation, and indeed virtual destruction of the detested non-Jews, the Goyim, or Goy, singular. So now we see the nature of the problem. The protocols lay out a brutal plan of action by Jews to acquire effective global power over the Goyim, by deceiving and exploiting them. But since it is cast in the form of a Jew talking to his fellow Jews, the language is benign, self-congratulatory, smug, but never anti-Semitic. I am tempted to call it the nicest work of anti-Semitism known to man. The very first thing that one encounters about the protocols upon reading virtually any conventional source is that they are a forgery. All orthodox sources, textbooks, news articles, encyclopedias, films, blogs seem overly anxious, desperately anxious, to impress upon the reader the idea that this document is bogus, fraudulent, nonsense, and utterly untrustworthy. For our present Jewish-inspired orthodoxy, this is fact number one about the protocols. I alluded to all this already. You, the reader, must first of all understand that they are totally and completely discredited. Everything else then follows from this fact, that the document was written by anti-Semites, that it promotes Jew hatred, that it has been unjustly famous, that it should never be taken seriously, and so on. In fact, what the protocols are a collection of 24 short writings that are written in the form of meeting minutes, or lecture notes, or perhaps a transcription of a series of talks, evidently given over a number of days. They do in fact constitute an official set of procedures for action toward the goal of world domination. Yet they are not extensive. The protocols vary considerably in length from around just 250 or 350 words, like Protocols 8 and 9, to well over 2,400 words, like Protocols 15 and 20. They outline in a general way a Jewish plan to acquire increasing power over non-Jewish societies, growing from a present level of dominating influence to, in the future, something approaching total control. This gain in power will come at the expense of the Goyim, who will be degraded, exploited, and functionally enslaved to a Jewish world leader called the Sovereign. Notably, there is virtually no context to the writings. As I mentioned above, no author, no introduction, no notes, no appendix, nothing to establish the actual setting of the document, and nothing to provide any elaboration. It is written in the first person. The speaker, evidently, is addressing a group of fellow Jews, apparently quite skilled and knowledgeable already, though still in the final phases of their initiation into some kind of Jewish elite. The document reads as if a professor somewhere was addressing a group of graduate students, preparing them for their future leadership roles in society. If these documents were the forgeries which Jewish apologists claim them to be, the forgers would probably have taken pains to make Jewish authorship so clear that their anti-Semitic purpose could easily have been detected. But only twice is the term Jew used in them. After one has read much further than the average reader usually cares to go into such matters, one comes upon the plans for the establishment of the world autocrat, and only then is it made clear of what lineage he is to be. The formula of speech is not, "We Jews will do this," but "the Gentiles will be made to think and do these things." With the exception of a few instances in the closing protocols, the only distinctive racial term used is Gentiles. To illustrate, the first indication of this kind comes in the first protocol in this way. The great qualities of the people, honesty and frankness, are essentially vices in politics, because they dethrone more surely and more certainly than does the strongest enemy. These qualities are attributes of Gentile rule. We certainly must not be guided by them. Monsignor Juin in Paris, who should be commended for the disclosure of the Jewish plans, then had investigations carried out in London as well, resulting in the discovery that the work in question really is in the British Museum, under call number 3926D17. As can be seen, the Jews gave it a false number by rearranging two of the numbers, and then announced to the world that the malign work, which the anti-Semites had lied about, was not there. Such attempts at falsification have been made several times. For a while, the German colony of Jewry spread the myth that the protocols were largely copied from the novel Biarritz, an anti-Semitic pamphlet. The novel in question, from 1869, has now been loaned out from the Munich State Library, and a local group, the German Nationalist Protection and Defense League in Nuremberg, offered a large prize for successfully proving the above assertion. The prize is still outstanding today. The second attempt at deception was unsuccessful. It was no different with the claim coming from the Paris ghetto that Russian anti-Semites had plundered Monsieur Joly's Dialogues au enfer entre Machiavelli et Montesquieu from 1871. It turned out that this Joly himself was a Hebrew and one of the leaders of the Commune. Incidentally, those who know Judaism claim that the thoughts and plans expressed in the protocols are not unheard of in Jewish history, but rather can be found in Jewish literature through all the centuries up to the present time. And for anyone who's paid even the slightest bit of attention to people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, this idea of we are going to do what we want, we are the chosen people, we are not to be opposed, we will crush you. We just hear this all the time. It's not a conspiracy. It's just on video. You can watch it for yourself. So they may have been able to get away with this in whatever, 1869, 1871, whatever it was. But now when people say it on video in 4K, you have to ask yourself, okay, am I just making things up? It continues here. The story that Russian secret police, after the first Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897, had procured a copy of the minutes, lectures, discussions, or whatever one might call the collection, and handed it over for publication to Sergei Nilus, known as a connoisseur of Judaism, and still living in hiding in Russia today, remains the most probable. Also of great interest is a 1919 confession by the Zionist Littman Rosenthal in the American Jewish News of September the 19th, which reports that Nordau gave a speech in Paris in 1903 that prophesied World War I, the Versailles Peace Conference, and a Jewish state of Palestine under the protectorate of England. In other words, exactly what happened in 1914 and ended in 1919 in San Remo with the British Mandate. In this speech, Nordau said, among other things, Herzl knows that we are confronting the whole world with a terrible shock. Herzl knew it. Why? Because he knew of forces that were consciously working towards the catastrophe. The text contains other oddities. Neither the Talmud nor the Shulchan Aruch are mentioned, as would be expected from a conventional anti-Semite. Writers of that time frequently cited damning passages from those documents in support of their claims. Also, Old Testament passages are almost non-existent, with one exception in Protocol 5, and the biblical Messiah figure is never defended via Old Testament citation, which argues against my point above. The word Jew appears only twice, both in Protocol 8. Christianity is also referenced only twice, in Protocol 1 and 17. But God appears 20 times, and Goy or Goyim some 130 times. In sum, these facts are neither what we might expect from a Gentile forgery, nor from a leaked Jewish document. Once again, further mysteries. In the end, some might say all that matters is, do the protocols give a true depiction of Jewish intentions and activities? And for Ford, Rosenberg, Hitler, and others, the answer is yes. The document is accurate. Therefore, it is a reliable guide to Jewish thinking and thus useful in formulating solutions to the Jewish question. It is true if it gives a true reading of the Jewish mindset and Jewish worldview. And is it accurate? Do Jews indeed have intentions to dominate or rule the world? This is arguably the central question of the entire protocols. And here we can say with confidence that the answer is a resounding yes. And hilariously, we are in the season just after Thomas Massey was defeated in a primary in Kentucky, in which Israeli-backed forces spent millions and millions of dollars to defeat him. And then are they going to turn around and say to us, how dare you say that Israel has influence in American politics when they spent money to defeat somebody in Kentucky? Where is that in relation to Israel? Where is that in relation to Palestine? If you are enjoying this content, please consider hitting like or subscribe or sending this to people who like looking at dangerous texts like this one. What are the theses of the protocols with which, in the absence of public criticism, British readers have to grapple with alone and unaided? They are, roughly, and here there are 7 points listed. 1. There is and has been for centuries a secret international political organization of the Jews. 2. The spirit of this organization appears to be an undying traditional hatred of the Christian world and a titanic ambition for world domination. 3. The goal relentlessly pursued through centuries is the destruction of the Christian national states and the substitution for them of an international Jewish dominion. 4. The method adopted for first weakening and then destroying existing bodies politic is the infusion of disintegrating political ideas of carefully measured progressive disruptive force, from liberalism to radicalism and socialism to communism, culminating in anarchy as a reductio ad absurdum of egalitarian principles. Meanwhile, Jewry remains immune from these corrosive doctrines. We preach liberalism to the Gentiles, but on the other hand, we keep our own nation in entire subjection. Out of the welter of world anarchy, in response to the desperate clamor of distraught humanity, the stern, logical, wise, and pitiless rule of the King of the seed of David is to arise. 5. Political dogmas evolved by Christian Europe, democratic statesmanship and politics are all equally contemptible to the elders of Zion. To them, statesmanship is an exalted secret art, acquired only by traditional training and imparted to a select few in the secrecy of some occult sanctuary. Political problems are not meant to be understood by ordinary people. They can only be comprehended, as I have said before, by rulers who have been dealing and have been directing affairs for many centuries. To this conception of statesmanship, the masses are contemptible cattle. Sorry, this is point 6. To this conception of statesmanship, the masses are contemptible cattle, and the political leaders of the Gentiles, upstarts from its midst as rulers, are likewise blind in politics. They are puppets, pulled by the hidden hand of the elders, puppets who are mostly corrupt, always inefficient, easily coaxed or bullied, or blackmailed into submission, unconsciously furthering the advent of Jewish dominion. Can you think of a better description of President Trump than that? Mostly corrupt, always inefficient, easily coaxed or bullied or blackmailed into submission. But it says you're unconsciously furthering. I mean, he's definitely consciously furthering the advent of Jewish dominion. Point 7, the press, the theater, stock exchange speculations, science, law itself are in the hands that hold all the gold. So many means of procuring a deliberate confusion and bewilderment of public opinion, demoralization of the young, and encouragement of the vices of the adult, eventually substituting, in the minds of the Gentiles, for the idealistic aspiration of Christian culture, the cash basis, and a neutrality of materialistic skepticism, or a cynical lust for pleasure. On all 7 of these points, as the kids say these days, no lies detected. If these are the theses of the protocols, all of these things are true. And the question is not whether this is a forgery, but whether what is laid out in these documents are meaningful and true. That's what has to be examined. The idea of casting it as a forgery is a distraction. It's there to stop you from looking at the text and asking why are all of these things true, despite being written more than 100 years ago? Why is everything true in our society? Why does it look like it's been going to an exact plan? And as I said before, there are people who don't believe that the protocols are genuine, in the sense they were written by somebody, but they still express truths. So this is from, I think, Dr. Goebbels' diaries. So we've got a couple citations here. One is from the 10th of April, 1924. I believe that the protocols of the elders of Zion are a forgery, not because the worldview expressed in it or the Jewish aspirations seem too utopian and fantastic to me. One can see today how the claims of one protocol after another are realized, how a systematic plan of decomposition leaves the world in ruins. But because I don't consider the Jews to be so boundlessly stupid that they couldn't keep such important records secret. Hence, I believe in the inner, but not factual truth of the protocols. So as I said before, in a sense, it doesn't matter who wrote them. What matters is what do they say and are they true or not. One's hair stands on end when reading these shameful pieces, and yet race and system lie within it. The biggest mistake of anti-Semitism is that it underestimates the Hebrews in their spiritual resources. It may perish due to this. And this is from the 13th of May, 1943. I once again thoroughly studied the Zionist protocols. Until now, I had always been told that they were unsuitable for current propaganda. Reading them today, I find that we can use them very well. The Zionist protocols are as modern today as when they were first published. One is amazed at the extraordinary consequence with which Jewish striving for world domination is characterized. If the Zionist protocols are not genuine, they have been invented by a brilliant critic of the time. I went to the Führer around noon to talk about this topic. He argues that the Zionist protocols could claim to be absolutely genuine. No one can spell out Jewish striving for world mastery as brilliantly as the Jews themselves. The Führer is of the opinion that the Jews did not need to work according to a fixed plan. They work according to their racial instinct, which will cause them to act again and again in the same way that they have throughout their entire history. And before anyone, gets upset, I'm only reading this as part of historical evidence in relation to Dr. Goebbels. I'm not trying to endorse his thoughts or his opinions, but just pointing out for example, his personal opinion was that it was a forgery, but that doesn't matter. What matters is what's contained inside. This is more commentary, and this comes from Henry Ford. Every influence that leads to lightness and looseness in Gentile youth today heads up in a Jewish source. Did the young people of the world devise the sport clothes which have had so deleterious an effect on the youth of the times that every publicist has thought it worthy of mention? Those styles come out of Jewish clothing concerns, where certainly art is not the rule, nor moral influence the main consideration. The moving picture is an interesting development of photography, allied with the show business, but whose is the responsibility for its development along such lines as to make it a menace to the minds of millions? So serious a menace that it has not escaped observation and condemnation everywhere. Who are the masters of musical jazz in the world? Who direct all the cheap jewelry houses, the bridgehead show parks, the Coney Islands, the centers of nervous thrills and looseness? It is possible to take the showy young man and woman of trivial outlook and loose sense of responsibility, and tag them outwardly and inwardly, from their clothing and ornaments to their hectic ideas and hopes, with the same tag, made, introduced, and exploited by a Jew. And you can look today. So this is written back then. Who owns Pornhub? Who owns OnlyFans? Who has created or been involved in the creation or the financing of these websites? This corrosive filth that destroys our society. Are these led by Buddhists, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, or could it be someone else? And all you have to do is look. Unlike in the old days, Google is now available to you, although sometimes the results may be blocked. Or AI will tell you that they don't know the answer to the question. It is not so much the financial loss that is to be mourned, nor yet the atrocities committed upon good taste, but the fact that the silly Gentile crowds walk into the net willingly, even gaily, supposing the change of the fashion to be as inevitable as the coming of spring, supposing the new demand on their earnings to be as necessary and as natural as taxes. The crowds think that somehow they have part in it, when their only part is to pay, and then pay again for the new extravagance when the present one palls. There are men in this country who know 2 years ahead what the frivolities and extravagances of the people will be, because they decree what they shall be. These things are strictly business, demoralizing to the Gentile majority, enriching to the Jewish minority. This text is taken from the Berliner Tageblatt, which was a Jewish newspaper at the time. Obscenity is absolutely necessary for the youth. Old maids argue the fantasy that young boys and girls are corrupted by obscene literature. In reality, however, the fantasies of young people going through puberty are rather obscene, and these fantasies need obscene literature to redirect their arousal in harmless ways. Just think through that. What we need for young people is pornography so that their fantasies can be directed in harmless ways. If anyone knows, we have all of the research now, pornography is extremely harmful to members of both sexes. The idea that it's harmless is trying to be passed off here in this Jewish newspaper. If one takes obscene literature away from the youth, the number of youthful sex crimes would increase tremendously. So if you take away pornography, there's going to be more sex crimes. An outlet would be closed, and thus an inner pressure would have destructive effects. Obscene literature means as much, even more to the youth than dirty jokes to adults. What would become of all the fine gentlemen and workers who exchange dirty jokes at pubs, bowling clubs, or even evening events if one closed off that outlet? What filthiness would they do if they could no longer talk about filthiness? Just incredibly stupid. As if we want a society in which dirty jokes are told anyway. This sort of filth has to be suppressed. And there is a religion that has been trying to, over centuries, to suppress this sort of filth. And there is another religion that has been promoting it. Do the investigation yourself. As much as the means are diabolical, much of the final regime is positive, even desirable. The protocols are thus presented as a composite catechism in which, on the lips of the same protagonists, cunning alternates with wisdom, revolution with restoration, today's evil with tomorrow's good. When they slyly use the Trinitarian principles of the French Revolution, when they alternate between capitalism and socialism to corrode the organic and hierarchical societies of the great monarchies, the elders are treacherous and malevolent characters. But when they announce the Jewish kingdom or describe the ideal regime against which their own weapons would be ineffective, they are paternal and wise rulers, worthy of imitation. And we'll end today's episode by quoting Bernard Lazare, who wrote about the real causes of anti-Semitism. He was someone who was investigating himself, and his book, it's a small one, and I will get to that hopefully later this year, which takes an honest look at what are the causes of so-called anti-Semitism. Here's just an excerpt from it. If one wants to trace a complete history of anti-Semitism without leaving out any manifestation of the sentiment, following its various phases and modifications, one must examine the history of Israel from its dispersion, or rather, from the time of its expansion outside the territory of Palestine. Wherever the Jews have settled, ceasing to be a nation, ready to defend its freedom and independence, everywhere, anti-Semitism, or rather anti-Judaism, has arisen. If this hostility, even repugnance, had been exercised toward the Jews only in a particular epoch, or in a single country, it would be easy to clarify the specific causes of these outbursts of anger. But this race was, on the contrary, exposed to the hatred of all the peoples in whose midst it was established. It was therefore necessary, since the enemies of the Jews belonged to the most diverse races, lived in countries far removed from each other, were governed by different laws, governed by opposite principles, had neither the same customs nor the same morals, were animated by dissimilar intentions that did not allow them to judge all things in the same way. It was therefore necessary that the general causes of anti-Semitism had always been inherent in Israel itself, not of those who fought it. This is not to assert that the persecutors of the Israelites always had the right on their side, nor that they did not indulge in all the excesses that the most violent hatreds entail, but to establish in principle that the Jews caused, at least in part, their own evils. This is written by Bernard Lazare, a Jew. He would today be accused of a blood libel, being a self-hating Jew, but this is just honesty, and as we've said before, no lies detected. So this is the end of part 1, Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I'll put a link in the description. I don't know if you'll be able to buy this text on Amazon. I find it unlikely, but I'll try to put a link in the description to a place where you could pick up a copy. If you haven't done so already, remember to hit like and subscribe if you're watching this, where you can hit the hype button, whatever that does. That helps us. Please do that. Share this with someone who might be interested. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, there's a link to PayPal and Buy Me a Coffee below. If you'd like to get early access to videos like this one, as well as a once-a-month exclusive video sharing what's going on behind the scenes and what I'm reading and thinking about, there are links to Patreon and YouTube membership. Whichever platform you choose, the benefits are the same. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, my Amazon wish list is listed below, and you'll see all sorts of books on there. Books on Palestine are from my Palestine bookshelf project. Feel free to check that out if you'd like. But books that are not about Palestine are for this channel. Buy one, send it my way, and I'll do my best to review it in a timely manner. Until the next episode, and until next time, enjoy your reading.